She only went inside because of the rain. The storm rolled over the small town like something ancient, bending the trees and turning the old stone church into a dark silhouette against a sky cut by flashes of white. When she pushed the heavy wooden door, the scent of old incense and cold stone wrapped around her, thick as a memory she didn't want to remember. She thought the place would be empty. It should have been empty. No cars outside, no mass scheduled, just a forgotten sanctuary on a Tuesday night. Yet as soon as her footsteps echoed on the cracked tiles, she heard it. A voice, soft, female, calm. "You came," it whispered. She froze, every muscle in her body locked, the way it did in those moments when her faith felt more like fear than comfort. Slowly, she turned her head toward the side aisle, toward the flicker of one lonely candle that shouldn't be burning. Sitting in the second pew, hands folded, veil falling over delicate shoulders, there she was, a nun in an old-fashioned habit, the deep navy cloth almost swallowing the light. The woman's eyes met hers, and something inside her chest dropped. The nun knew her, not from church, not from town, on a deeper level, as if she had read every page of her life. "You must not go back there tomorrow," the nun said, and the words didn't feel like advice. They felt like a verdict, or a warning written in invisible ink across her future. She opened her mouth to ask, "Where? Why? Who are you?" But by the time the questions reached her tongue, the pew was empty. No sound of steps, no rustle of fabric, nothing but the storm outside and the echo of a warning that refused to leave her mind. Her name was Elena Ward, 49 years old, and she did not believe in coincidences anymore. Not after the last 3 years. Not after losing her job a week before her divorce was finalized. Not after watching her savings evaporate and her sense of safety crumble, one overdue bill at a time. Once, she had believed that if she worked hard, prayed regularly, and tried to be a good person, life would at least be fair. But life had not been fair, and her faith, once warm and bright, now felt like a candle still burning in a room where every window had shattered. That night, she only wanted shelter from the storm and a quiet place to breathe. The church had always been there, at the edge of town, older than the grocery store, older than the school, older than almost everything. Built when people still believed that suffering had meaning and silence could be holy. As the thunder rolled and the rain washed the streets clean, Elena stepped inside, expecting nothing more than stone, shadows, and maybe a moment of stillness. What she found instead was a presence that did not fit in any of her logical categories. A nun in a habit style she had only seen in old photographs. Eyes that seemed to recognize wounds Elena never spoke about out loud. And a single sentence that split her mind in two. "You must not go back there tomorrow." Back. Back where? To the office where she planned to beg for one more chance? To the lawyer she couldn't afford anymore? To the house where memories of a cold, silent marriage still clung to the walls? Or was it something deeper, a place inside her she kept revisiting without even realizing it? That night would become the pivot of everything, the moment when mystery entered her ordinary life and divine timing began to rearrange what she thought was already decided. The door closed behind Elena with a low, reluctant groan, as if the church itself were thinking twice about letting her in. She shook rain from her hair and brushed the drops off her coat, the fabric already heavy from the downpour. The silence inside wasn't completely silent. It held small sounds that only appear in old buildings. The ticking drip of water somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of electricity from a forgotten light. The barely audible sigh of wind slipping through a crack in the stained glass window above the altar, making the colored glass tremble almost imperceptibly. She ran a hand over the back of the nearest pew, feeling the smoothness of wood polished by generations of hands. Her own mother had sat in these pews once, on holidays and funerals, whispering prayers that felt too big for Elena to understand as a child. Back then, this place seemed enormous, filled with mystery and rules and promises of redemption for sins she hadn't committed yet. Now, it felt smaller. Or maybe she had just grown too used to measuring everything in terms of deadlines, interest rates, and credit scores. She took a few steps down the center aisle, breathing in the mix of wax, stone, and that faint trace of incense that always lingered no matter how many years passed. It smelled like every mass she'd half listened to, every guilty prayer she'd rushed, every moment she'd asked for prosperity, as if God were a reluctant banker behind a celestial desk. Thunder cracked outside, louder this time, making the stained glass vibrate in its frame. She flinched, then laughed quietly at herself, the sound disappearing quickly into the high arches of the ceiling. That was when she heard it. You came. The words didn't echo the way her footsteps had. They settled, soft, precise, certain. Elena stopped in the middle of the aisle, heart thudding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her first thought was that someone else had come in after her. A woman, maybe. Another person hiding from the storm. She turned slowly toward the side aisle, where the light was dimmer, and saw the faint glow of a candle she didn't remember seeing when she walked in. One single flame, burning steady, though she hadn't heard anyone striking a match. On the second pew, angled slightly toward the altar, sat the figure, a veil, a habit, navy cloth falling in neat lines. The profile of a woman, chin slightly lifted, as if listening to something Eleanor could not hear. "I didn't mean to disturb," Eleanor managed, her voice too loud in the quiet. It sounded clumsy, almost childish. "I just needed a place to—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't know how to explain that what she needed wasn't exactly shelter from rain, but from a life that felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. The nun turned her head, and for a second Elena forgot how to breathe. The woman's eyes were calm, but not empty. They were not the distant, resigned eyes she expected from someone who had supposedly left the world behind for a cloister. There was a depth there, something like knowing and pity and a strange, quiet strength. It felt like those eyes had seen her before, somewhere else, in a moment where her life had been breaking and she thought no one was looking. "You're late," the nun said softly. The voice matched the eyes. Gentle, but with an undercurrent that refused to be ignored. Elena's skin prickled. "Late for what?" she asked, trying to scan the pews around her, looking for some logical anchor. There were no coats hanging, no umbrellas leaning against the wood. No bags, no phones, nothing to suggest anyone else had come in, just this woman in blue, as still as a painting that had decided to move. "For your own life," the nun replied. The words landed in the space between them like a weight, heavy and undeniable. Elena swallowed, a bitter taste rising at the back of her throat. She had heard variations of that line in self-help books, from therapists, from YouTube videos talking about manifestation and abundance, about how she needed to step into her purpose, but never like this. Not from someone whose presence made the air feel older, thicker, charged with something that wasn't TikTok spirituality or a podcast about mindset. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, the question barely making it out. The nun tilted her head slightly, as if the question were both too simple and too complicated to answer in one sentence. "You must not go back there tomorrow," she said instead. The words slid under Elena's skin and lodged themselves somewhere deep in the place where anxiety usually lived. "Back where?" she asked, her voice cracking. "To the office? The house? The lawyer?" The nun's gaze didn't move. It felt like she was looking past Elena, through her, into some invisible landscape mapped out in every choice she had made since the first time she betrayed herself to keep the peace. "You already know," the nun said. And the worst part was that some part of Elena did. A tightness in her chest pulsed at the mention of tomorrow, At the thought of the place she planned to go, the person she planned to face, the deal she was about to make with her own fear. Lightning flared outside, throwing a brief flash of colored light through the stained glass. Instinctively, Elena glanced toward the altar. It was only a second, maybe less. But when she turned back, the pew was empty. No rustle of fabric, no sound of footsteps fading down the aisle, no side door whispering shut, nothing, just the candle burning steadily, its flame unnaturally still, as if the air around it had been frozen. For a long moment, Elena stood there, the emptiness of the pew roaring louder than the thunder. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe the nun had walked away without her noticing. Maybe Elena was more tired than she thought. Stress carving hallucinations out of old Catholic symbols. Maybe grief and fear had finally found a way to dress themselves in a habit and speak out loud. She approached the pew slowly, fingertips grazing the wood. The place where the nun had been seated was faintly warm, as if someone had just risen. A chill ran down her spine. At the end of the pew, sitting where a hand would naturally rest, lay a small, worn wooden rosary. The cross was smooth from use, the beads darkened by years of being pressed between fingers in quiet, desperate prayer. She picked it up, expecting the coldness of abandoned objects. Instead, it felt alive. Almost warm, like it had been held seconds ago by someone whose pulse still lingered in the wood. Her stomach flipped. "This is insane," she whispered to herself, but her voice trembled too much to be convincing. She tucked the rosary into her coat pocket, more from instinct than intention, as if some old reflex from childhood had resurfaced. Something inside whispered that she should leave, go back home, pretend this never happened. Another, quieter voice, the one she hadn't listened to in years, began to stir, the part of her that still believed in divine timing, in subtle interventions, in warnings that come before the worst kind of storm. As she stood there trying to steady her breath, another thought crossed her mind. Strange, but clear, she was not the only one feeling this. There were other people out there just like her, walking around with questions they never dared to say out loud, with stories they had buried under routine and survival. People who felt watched over and abandoned at the same time. If someone like that was listening now, drawn to mysteries of faith and shadows inside holy places, maybe they needed to hear what would happen next. Maybe they needed to stay close. "If you're hearing this," she thought, almost as if speaking to them, "stay with me through this story, follow every detail, and if it resonates, find a way to keep this light near. Subscribe, stay connected, let the bell remind you, because some warnings don't come twice." She exhaled slowly, the decision forming inside her without words. She would not ignore this. She would not pretend this was nothing. Tomorrow was coming, whether she wanted it or not. And now, thanks to a nun who wasn't supposed to be there, she knew one thing for sure. Going back there might cost more than she could afford to lose. The rain was still pounding hard when Elena stepped out of the church. The night air hit her like a cold wash of reality, yet nothing could shake the sense that something had left the sanctuary with her. Something walking quietly at her side, unseen but undeniably present. She slipped her hand into the pocket of her coat, feeling the warm, pulsing weight of the rosary. The beads had no right to feel alive, but every time her fingers brushed them, a faint heat spread through her skin as if someone else had just been holding them. Her footsteps echoed along the empty street, merging with the hiss of rain sliding off rooftops and the restless scrape of branches dragging across the pavement. The town felt asleep, but the darkness carried a tension she couldn't explain, a sense of being watched by eyes that didn't belong to any living person. By the time she reached her house, the lights flickered before settling into a dim glow. A strange smell lingered in the air, dampness mixed with something metallic, like old keys or blood left too long in the cold. Elena removed her coat and tried to shake off the church from her thoughts. Maybe the nun had been real. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe stress could carve hallucinations out of sacred spaces when fear lived long enough inside someone. But when she turned toward the living room, she froze. The candle on her table, the one she had used weeks ago during a desperate, half-believing prayer, was lit. Its small flame burned steady, too steady, as if the air around it had thickened to hold it upright. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't breathe. The candle had been dead for weeks. It didn't even have enough wick left to burn this long. She had snuffed it out herself, the last time she prayed like a woman who didn't know if anyone was listening. But now, the flame danced as if welcoming her home. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, startling her. When she saw the name on the screen, Victor, her stomach twisted. Her ex-husband hadn't called in months. He had no reason to. Not after signing the divorce papers and walking away without looking back. The call ended before she could answer. But the timing, impeccable, unsettling, felt like a thread connecting the church, the nun, the candle, and whatever was coming toward her through the dark. Before she could lower her phone, the screen lit up again. This time, not with a call, with a verse, not from an app, not from a note, not from anything she recognized. Do not return to the path that broke you. Her knees weakened. This wasn't scripture. Not exactly. But it was the same message, the same warning. Tomorrow she was supposed to meet Victor, at his request, to close a cycle, he had said. Close a cycle, or reopen a wound she barely survived. The candle's flame suddenly flared higher, throwing a sharp, trembling shadow against the wall. Elena stepped back. The flame bent slightly, as if brushed by a hand she couldn't see. The house felt occupied, not invaded, just aware. She approached the candle carefully, spotting something she hadn't noticed from afar. The wick wasn't burning straight. It had a small, precise V etched into the charred fiber. A symbol, a signature. Victor. The nun's words echoed through her skull like someone whispering directly into her bloodstream. You must not go back there tomorrow. It wasn't advice, it was a warning that extended far beyond marriage and heartbreak. The lights flickered again. The candle trembled. The rosary grew warm in her pocket, hot, almost unbearable. A low sound crept down the hallway. A dragging sound, something moving on the floor just out of sight. Elena's breath tightened. She didn't want to look, but she had to. She walked toward the dark corridor, each step louder than the last. The house felt longer than usual, as if the walls were stretching with her fear. When she reached her bedroom door, the noise stopped, completely. She hesitated, lifted her hand, touched the switch. When the light came on, the room looked normal, too normal, except for one thing. Lying on her pillow, placed neatly, intentionally, was a single thread of deep navy blue fabric. Her chest tightened, the same color as the nun's habit. She touched it with trembling fingers. It was cold, real, out of place, and when she raised her eyes to the mirror beside her bed, her reflection felt wrong, like someone else was standing just behind her, moving in perfect synchrony. She blinked. The shadow vanished, but the dread remained. A truth settled into her bones. The nun hadn't appeared randomly, and the warning wasn't just about Victor or a meeting she could easily cancel. It was about something bigger, something old, something she had avoided for years. A place inside her she kept returning to without realizing it. A spiritual wound she kept reopening. A danger that followed patterns she had refused to see. And now, whatever had been watching her from a distance had stepped through the threshold of her home. Elena stood in the doorway of her bedroom for what felt like an entire minute before she could move. The navy blue thread lay softly against the white pillowcase like a quiet accusation, proof that someone or something had been close enough to touch the place where she laid her head every night. The more she stared at the thread, the more it felt like it did not belong to the physical world. It held a faint scent, almost imperceptible, incense and cold stone. The same scent that clung to the nun in the church. She picked it up carefully, almost reverently, as if it might crumble at her touch. But the fiber didn't fall apart. It was solid, smooth, strong. It belonged to clothing. Clothing far older than anything she had ever worn or seen up close. Clothing that had no business being in her bedroom. A sudden draught brushed her neck, raising the tiny hairs on her skin. She turned slowly, expecting to find a window open or a curtain swaying. Nothing moved. The air stood still. Yet her body knew something had passed by her, close enough to whisper through the small, involuntary tremble that went up her spine. She stepped backward into the hallway. The house felt narrower, darker, the shadows pressed against the corners like they were waiting for her to make the wrong choice. She forced her breath to slow, but the heaviness in her chest made every inhale feel shallow. She closed her eyes and whispered a single word, not a prayer she knew, not something rehearsed, but an instinct. Why? The word barely left her lips when the light above her flickered, once, twice, then steadied. She waited. Her heartbeat was the only thing she heard, until, very faintly, there was another sound. Paper. The whisper of paper being moved, coming from the living room. She followed the sound, each step deliberate. The air grew colder the closer she got. When she reached the table where the candle burned, she found something she hadn't left there, a small, folded note. Old paper, yellowed around the edges, creased as if it had been opened and closed many times. Her hand shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting inside was elegant, looping, the ink slightly faded. Do not return to him, and do not return to the place where you forgot yourself. Her stomach tightened. Him was obvious. But the place where you forgot yourself? The words pulsed inside her mind like they were alive, like they were forming a map not of physical space, but memory. She closed her eyes, and the images came quickly, uninvited, as if summoned by the note itself. A small room, a locked door. A woman crying, but not shown, only heard. A younger version of herself sitting on a cold floor, with her knees pulled to her chest, praying for someone to open the door. A voice telling her she was overreacting. A hand grabbing her wrist too tightly, the moment she stopped believing her feelings mattered. She inhaled sharply, eyes snapping open. The warmth from the candle felt suddenly oppressive. The walls felt closer. The memory wasn't random. It was a summons, a reminder of a wound she had buried so deeply she forgot it had roots. A soft tapping sound interrupted her thoughts. 3 taps, slow, even, coming from her front door. Her breath caught. She took a step backward, then another, her body instinctively recoiling. No one visited her at this hour. No one had reason to, and the rhythm didn't sound like knuckles. It was too soft, too measured, almost ritualistic. She waited. Silence. Then, again, 3 taps. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. She approached the door cautiously and leaned forward just enough to look through the peephole. The porch light was on, illuminating the rain-soaked street. Nothing moved. No figure stood there, no shadow. Nothing. She backed away, pulse pounding in her ears. Then came the whisper, not from the door, from behind her. "Elena." She turned so quickly she stumbled into the wall. The living room was empty. The hallway was still, but she heard it. A woman's voice, soft, familiar. The nun. Her throat tightened. "What do you want?" she whispered. A second whisper followed, closer this time, as if spoken from the air beside her ear. "Not what I want. What you need to remember." The rosary burned against her leg through her coat pocket, as if reacting, as if awakening. She pulled it out quickly, and the moment it touched her palm, the lights flickered again, and the note on the table fluttered like someone had blown across it. The house felt inhabited now, full. An invisible presence thickened the air, pressing gently but firmly against her skin, urging her to listen. "You forgot yourself," the whisper said again. Elena closed her eyes, and this time the memory came clearer. Not fragments, moments. Real moments. Victor yelling at her in the kitchen, inches from her face, calling her dramatic, unstable, oversensitive. The night she slept in her car, because she was too afraid to stay home. The morning after, when she pretended everything was fine, because she wanted peace more than truth. The day she found a message on his phone that wasn't meant for her. The way he convinced her it was her fault. The moment she stopped praying because she wondered if God had stopped listening. The peace of her soul she abandoned in exchange for temporary silence. When she opened her eyes, she was crying, quietly. Not weeping, but unraveling. "This is why I can't go back," she whispered. The candle's flame bent again, this time toward her like a nod, a confirmation. She wiped her face and exhaled shakily. "But why now? Why is she coming to me?" A soft rustle came from behind her. When she turned, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A faint outline on the wall above her bookshelf, as if a framed picture had once hung there and been removed. Dust lines marked a perfect rectangle, but she never had a picture there. She approached slowly, reaching out to touch the clean outline. Her fingers brushed the wall, and the air trembled around her like the surface of water, disturbed by a ripple. In the center of the empty rectangle, words began to appear, slowly, faintly, as though written by an invisible hand. "Tomorrow is the threshold." The ink darkened, curling into elegant old-world handwriting. Then another line formed beneath it. "And the threshold remembers you." A chill tore through her. She stepped back. Her heart hammered. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew one thing now with absolute certainty. The nun was not warning her about a single event. She was warning her about a crossing Eleanor had already made once, without understanding it. And tomorrow, she would be asked to cross again. Whether she survived it this time depended entirely on whether she remembered the pieces of herself she had abandoned. Elena backed away from the wall as the newly written words pulsed faintly, as if the ink itself were alive. "Tomorrow is the threshold." The phrase felt heavy, like it pulled the air down with it. The second line, "and the threshold remembers you," made her knees weaken. It wasn't just a warning, it was recognition, not of who she was now, but who she had once been. And of something she had crossed, long before she understood what crossing meant. The candle on the table flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that climbed the walls like living silhouettes. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, but her instincts screamed that the house was no longer neutral ground. Something sacred, or something ancient enough to feel sacred, had stepped inside with her. She wrapped the rosary around her hand, the beads searingly warm against her skin, anchoring her to something tangible in the chaos of the moment. A sudden creak came from the back of the house, not sharp, not alarming, more like the weight of someone sitting on an old wooden chair. Eleanor froze. She tried to tell herself it was the storm expanding the house's frame, or the wind pressing against the foundation. But she knew the difference. This sound carried intention. Her bare feet moved slowly across the floor, the cool wood grounding her with each step. The creak came again, this time unmistakably human, impossibly close. She followed it down the hallway, passing the bathroom, the coat closet, until she reached the guest room she rarely entered. The door was half open, a thin sliver of darkness separating her from whatever waited inside. She hesitated. The house fell utterly silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Elena pushed the door open. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft spill of hallway light. Nothing looked disturbed, just the neatly made bed, the dresser, the untouched nightstand. But something cold threaded through the air, prickling her arms. She took a tentative step inside, her breath clouding faintly in front of her. It shouldn't be that cold. Her eyes caught something near the foot of the bed, something small, metallic. She knelt to pick it up. A key, old-fashioned, heavy, worn around the edges as if handled by many hands. But the shape, she recognized it instantly. A cross carved into the bow. The same design etched on the church door she had entered earlier that night. She held the key tightly, and for a moment the room spun. A sensation swept through her like a memory trying to surface. She saw a hallway, stone, narrow, lined with flickering candles. A whisper, a door closing behind her, and then darkness. Elena gasped and stumbled back, nearly falling. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving a hollow ache in her chest. Memories that didn't feel like her memories, or perhaps memories she had sealed away so long ago that they no longer felt like they belonged to her. She stood, gripping the key so hard her hand began to tremble. A soft whisper floated from behind her. Elena. She spun around, heart pounding. The doorway was empty. Only the faint outline of her own shadow stretched across the corridor. Yet the whisper persisted. Gentler now, as though urging rather than warning. She stepped forward slowly, leaving the guest room behind. The hallway seemed longer than before, as though the walls had subtly shifted. She reached the living room and stopped. The candle's flame had grown taller, brighter, as if reacting to her presence. On the wall where the ink had appeared moments ago, another faint line was beginning to emerge, slowly, like the stroke of an invisible quill. Elena approached cautiously as the new words formed. You crossed once without seeing. Her heartbeat quickened. Crossed what? She whispered. The ink deepened. Tomorrow you will see. The flame snapped sharply, and the room darkened around her. The shadows lengthened, pressing against the edges of the space. A sound like soft fabric brushing stone drifted behind her. She turned. For a split second, just long enough to question her sanity, she saw the silhouette of the nun standing in the corner of the room. Not fully formed, not solid, a shape cut out of darkness, outlined by the faintest glow. Then the silhouette stepped back, dissolving into shadow. Elena felt the world tilt. She braced a hand on the table, gripping the edge. Her breath shook, her thoughts scattering. Why her? Why now? What threshold? And what part of her past was she supposed to remember that was powerful enough to summon a presence from beyond death? The key grew warm in her hand, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Elena closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, summoning the last fragile remnants of her faith. As fractured as her belief system had become, something inside her recognized the pattern. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't torment. It was awakening, the kind of awakening that forces a person to confront the truths they buried to survive. As she opened her eyes, the room shifted, and a low hum filled the air. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the space between breaths. She stepped back, scanning the room, searching for the source. The hum deepened, vibrating through her bones. A faint vibration echoed inside her chest, syncing with her heartbeat. The rosary in her hand glowed faintly, impossible yet undeniable. Then the hum stopped, and the living room became still again. But something had changed. The mirror across the room, the one she never paid attention to, now reflected something she couldn't see directly. She walked toward it slowly, each step deliberate. When she stood before it, she saw herself, shoulders tense, eyes wide, fear and determination tangled inside her expression. But behind her, The room wasn't empty. In the reflection, the nun stood a few feet behind her, veil draped over her shoulders, face half-shadowed but unmistakably solemn. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers interlaced with an old wooden rosary identical to the one Elena held. Elena turned instantly. Nothing, just the quiet room. She faced the mirror again. The nun was still there. But now, she was looking directly at Elena, her eyes a depth of sadness and urgency that struck something deep within her soul. And for the first time, the nun spoke without disappearing, without fading into air. Her lips moved, and Elena, frozen, breath caught, heart pounding, watched the words form slowly, deliberately, in the mirror. "Do not cross alone." The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room, and Elena finally understood. Whatever tomorrow held, whatever threshold waited, she was not being warned to avoid it. She was being prepared to survive it. The power outage swallowed the house so completely that for a heartbeat, Elena wondered if she had gone blind. The darkness was thick, velvety, the kind that absorbed sound and breath at the same time. She stood perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement would brush up against something she could not see. Her pulse pounded in her ears, a frantic rhythm against the oppressive quiet. Slowly, very slowly, her eyes adjusted enough to make out faint outlines. The candle on the table gave off a dim, ember-like glow, barely a whisper of light, but it was enough to guide her toward it. She reached for her lighter, her fingers fumbling, shaking harder than she cared to admit. When the flame finally sparked, it illuminated the immediate space with a warm halo that felt like an island in an ocean of black. As she touched the fire to the candlewick, the flame jumped alive, taller than before, burning with unnatural steadiness. Shadows snapped back into existence along the walls, stretching and shifting like something stirring awake. Elena swallowed hard and stepped back, letting the light settle. Then, something caught her eye. The mirror. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if reflecting more than just the room, as if the darkness behind her was still moving. She turned slowly, but as before, nothing stood in the physical space. Only in the reflection did the truth remain. The nun was still there. But now her expression had changed. No longer simply urgent, now sorrowful, almost pleading. Elena's grip tightened around the old key. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The nun's reflection lifted a hand, only in the mirror, and pointed downward towards something unseen at Elena's feet. Elena looked down. Nothing. But when she looked back up, the nun's gesture became more insistent, almost desperate. Elena hesitated, then dropped to her knees, pressing her palm against the wooden floor. It was cold, colder than the rest of the room. A chill seeped into her skin. She slid her hand slowly across the boards until her fingers brushed against something carved into the grain. A symbol, a small hand-carved cross, worn, weathered, old. It didn't look new. It looked as if it had been etched there decades ago, before she ever moved into the house, before she even knew this street existed. Her breath hitched. "Why is this here?" As if answering her, the floor beneath her hand vibrated softly, just once, like the faintest heartbeat pulsing through wood. Elena jerked her hand back. "What is this?" she whispered into the room. "Why show me this? Why now?" The flame flickered sharply. The mirror darkened around the edges. The nun's reflection took a step forward, again, only in the glass, and mouthed something Elena couldn't quite decipher. The motion repeated, slow, deliberate. Elena leaned closer. "Say it again," she whispered, staring at the nun's lips. This time she heard it, a voice that wasn't sound but memory. "This is where you crossed." Her stomach dropped. "Crossed what?" The nun raised her hand once more, 3 fingers outstretched, then folded them into a fist. 3, then 1, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 years, 1 moment. Elena shook her head, trying to piece together the meaning. And then, like a slow-burning fuse reaching its destination, something detonated inside her memory, not a vision, not a metaphor, a truth. 24 years earlier, she had been here. Not in this house. This house wasn't built yet, but on this land, in a building that had stood before the house replaced it, a structure long demolished, a convent annex. Her knees buckled as the memory slammed into her. She was 25, lost, broken from her first rupture with Victor, wandering into a retreat she didn't understand. She remembered running, crying, being unable to breathe, pounding on a wooden door while a nun held her, whispering, "You are crossing something you don't see yet. You must not return to the place that breaks you." Her jaw trembled. It wasn't the same nun, but the voice was identical. The room swayed. Elena pressed her hand to the floor again, and this time more memories rose like ghosts from the wood. She had knelt here once, prayed here once, begged here once, and the nun from her memory, the one who held her and whispered encouragement, had died the same year. Yet she had heard her voice tonight, had felt her presence, had seen her reflection. The threshold wasn't a metaphor. It was a place, a wound that existed on land and soul at once. Elena looked up at the mirror again. The nun's reflection now stood closer, her rosary hanging from her folded hands. Her solemn expression held something new, a quiet knowing, a painful recognition. "You crossed once," Elena whispered. "I didn't understand then, and I tried to go back. I went back to him, to the pain, to the place where I lost myself." The nun nodded slowly. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. She wasn't being haunted. She was being guided. Her breath steadied. "And tomorrow, if I go, I cross again." The nun's reflection lowered her chin in something like a bow. Elena wiped her cheeks, exhaling shakily. "Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to survive this." The room grew still. The flame tightened. A soft vibration hummed under the floor, then stopped. On the wall beside the mirror, ink began to bloom again, as if rising through the paint from a deeper layer beneath. Letters formed one by one, slow and sure. "Remember who stood with you." Elena read it out loud. "Who stood with me?" Her voice echoed softly. Then another line materialized under the first, "And who did not?" Elena's breath caught. A memory surfaced, the clearest yet. The night she begged Victor to stay, he walked away. The night she prayed for comfort, the nun sat with her. The day she broke, she was alone. The day she found strength, someone she barely knew held her up. "Faith isn't only vertical," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. "It's horizontal. It's who stands beside you." The mirror flickered. The nun's expression softened. She unfolded her hands, extended one toward Elena, in the reflection only. Elena reached toward the glass, her fingertips trembling inches from the surface. For a moment, just one perfect, fragile moment, the glass felt warm. Then the warmness faded, the silhouette dissolved, and the living room fell silent. Elena stood there, holding the key, the rosary, and the truth. Tomorrow was not about danger. It was about choice. A threshold was not a trap. It was a test, and some thresholds remembered those who crossed them. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving the world washed in that strange silver calm that follows a night where something shifted, internally, spiritually, or in whatever silent realm connects the living to the unseen. Elena stood at her window, watching droplets slide down the glass like thin rivers. Every reflection, her face, the room behind her, the faint halo of daylight, felt sharper, more deliberate, as if the world had stepped into a different register. She clutched the key in her hand. heavy, cold, ancient. The rosary hung loosely around her wrist, warm against her skin, as though it still carried the echo of someone else's pulse. Today was the day, the threshold. She didn't know exactly what she would face, but she knew where she had to go, not to Victor. That path was already closed, not to the office that drained her, or the home where she'd once shrunk herself into someone unrecognizable. No, she needed to go back to the place beneath all of it, the original crossing, the site of the old convent annex. She dressed slowly, grounding herself in each movement, like a woman stepping into a version of herself she had abandoned long ago. The air in the house vibrated faintly, barely perceptible, but undeniably present. She felt watched, not by danger, but by memory, by guidance, by someone who wanted her to make it through what she had failed to see the first time. She stepped onto the street, the air cool and clean. The storm had left a sheen on the pavement, turning it into a path of shifting reflections as she walked. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of gravel under her shoes, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant toll of a church bell marking the hour. Her breath hitched. The bell. It wasn't Sunday, it wasn't Mass. No one rang that bell today, unless it wasn't meant for the town, unless it was meant for her. Elena followed the sound. It led her down a long, sloping road, past empty fields and into a patch of woods she hadn't walked through since she was 25. She remembered walking here years ago, broken, lost, barely able to breathe. She'd believed she was alone then. She now knew she wasn't. The trees opened into a clearing. The land was flat, almost unnaturally so, as if the earth had been pressed down long ago by the weight of a building that no longer stood. The air felt different here, thicker, more resonant, as if carrying the echo of prayers spoken by voices long gone. Elena stopped at the center, her breath forming a thin fog in the morning light. She knelt, pressing her fingertips to the soil. Cold seeped into her skin. And then, a vibration. Soft at first, then steady, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Elena closed her eyes as memory surged. The soft voice of a nun whispering comfort. The feeling of arms wrapped around her shaking body. The scent of incense mixed with tears. The moment she begged, "Please don't let me go back," and the gentle reply, "Then don't cross alone." Her eyes snapped open. That was the phrase the nun in the mirror mouthed. Not a warning, a reminder. Elena rose slowly, the key heavy in her hand. The wind shifted, brushing her hair across her face. In the rustling leaves, she heard it again, the faintest whisper of cloth, the same familiar sound she had heard inside her home. She turned. The nun stood at the edge of the clearing, not a reflection, not a shadow. Not an illusion created by fear, a presence. Her navy blue habit stirred gently in the wind, though the air around her was still. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the sorrow of someone who had watched Elena walk into the same fire twice, once unaware, once warned. Elena stepped forward, the ground soft beneath her feet. "Why me?" she whispered, voice trembling. The nun tilted her head, her expression tender. When she finally spoke, her voice felt like a memory Elena had lived and forgotten. "Because you believed breaking was safer than becoming." Elena's knees weakened. Tears blurred her vision. All the years she had stayed where she was hurting, because she thought she deserved it, because survival had felt like loyalty, because silence had felt like peace, rose up in her chest like a wave. She shook her head. "I was scared." The nun nodded softly. "Fear builds the first threshold. Habit builds the next." Elena's breath caught. "And now?" The nun's eyes softened into something almost maternal. "Now you choose." A gust of wind swept through the clearing. Leaves swirled around Elena's feet. The earth beneath her vibrated again, stronger this time, as if awakening. The key in her hand grew warm. She knelt, and the moment the key touched the ground, light bloomed beneath the soil. A circle of soft golden radiance rippled outward, illuminating the clearing with a sacred glow. It wasn't sunlight. It wasn't electricity. It felt like memory and faith intertwined, like the ground itself remembered her presence. Elena bowed her head, overwhelmed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She understood. The threshold wasn't a doorway. It wasn't a moment in time. It wasn't a place she had to avoid. It was a self she had abandoned. And now she was crossing back into herself. The light brightened, then slowly faded, absorbed into the earth as if sealing her choice. When she looked up, the nun was still there, but her form had softened, edges blurring like a candle's flame, swaying gently in a quiet room. Elena whispered, "Thank you." The nun lifted a hand, palm facing her. A blessing, a farewell, a reminder, and then, like breath dissolving in cold air, she faded, leaving the clearing silent, but not empty. Elena stood, wiped her tears, and exhaled deeply. Something inside her had returned, something that had been waiting for years. She turned back toward town, the rosary gently swinging from her wrist. The world felt different now, not lighter, but clearer, as if finally aligned. Faith wasn't a question anymore. Redemption wasn't a mystery. Divine timing wasn't something outside her, it was her. She walked forward, whispering to the wind, part prayer, part vow, "I won't cross alone again." The clearing behind her held the echo, and for anyone listening, anyone who had ever felt a spiritual warning tug at their soul, anyone who had ever stood at a threshold between who they were and who they needed to become, the story whispered back, "Neither should you." If you've ever felt something calling you back to yourself, something you couldn't explain, tell your story below and stay with us. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, and walk this path with us. No one crosses alone.